Hi everyone, good evening. I am Camille, Uplifter's Head of Programs. Thank you for joining me tonight. Uplifters is a nonprofit organization empowering underprivileged communities with online education and peer support. And what we do, we offer a money management course and personal growth for domestic workers. It's all online and it's all for free for migrant domestic workers. Any migrant domestic workers in the world can join. And to do that, the only thing that you need to do is to go on our community page on Facebook and click send a message. So we really invite you to join the course. So tonight is the 16th episode of our Uplift Your Night series, and we're delighted to be having it running. I can see that some of you are already joining. It's very nice to see you connecting. Please do not hesitate to comment and use the comment box to say who you are and where you're watching us from. Also, you're very welcome to share your own experiences on what long-distance parenting is in the comment box if you want, as this will be the topic for tonight's show. But before we dive further into the topic, I just wanted to remind everyone that the very first objective with this Facebook Live is to be together. Uplifters is first and foremost a community. And secondly, we want to keep learning together and support each other. So I think we can slowly get started. So let me introduce our topic for tonight. So tonight, we'll be discussing long-distance parenting, being far away for months, if not years, while maintaining a relationship is one of the most emotionally challenging circumstances, especially when it is with one's own children. So among the solutions that we'll be discussing together are, for example, developing a pre-departure action plan, coordinating regularly with partners and guardians, those who are taking care of your children while you're walking abroad. Or another example could be approaching everyday situations proactively with the child's best interest at heart. So our guest presentations aims to help bridge the distance between overseas workers and their children. So I see more and more people are joining. That makes me very happy. So just talking about our guest for tonight, let's welcome Christina Temar to discuss this very interesting topic. And I will have her join the live now. Good evening, Christina.
Hello. Good evening. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.
Evening,
Thank you
everyone.
very much for joining. We're very happy. This is, as I was just saying in introduction, a very important topic. And I was thinking maybe you could start sharing your presentation now, so I can say a few words about who you are and what you do, and feel free to complete any information you'd like to share with the audience.
Sure. Okay, let me just do that. Absolutely. Just let me let it load. Can you see it okay?
We can see it very well. Yeah, we're all good.
Great.
So
great.
Christina, she's a coach. She's a supporter of Uplifters. We're very, very grateful that she's with us tonight. And Christina, what she does is that she supports people to gain a clearer understanding of where they are in their life and where they want to go, as it impacts them and their families in the short, but also the long term. So she's a personal empowerment trainer and a professional development coach. So Christina, you share approaches and personal insight based on both your extensive experience of engagement with the migrant domestic workers community in Hong Kong and also working overseas yourself for the last 20 years, right?
Yes.
Would you like to say a little bit more?
Sure, absolutely. First of all, thank you very much for having me on the program again. It's wonderful to be here. I'm excited to share some thoughts and insights with you all this evening. So my name is Christy, or I go by Christina, and I'm the founder and director of Next Chapters, which is an organization that partners with other organizations to bring about educational initiatives. And my experience has started a long time ago, over 20 years ago. And what brings me here tonight, if we can see here in the picture, is my experience with long distance parenting. And where it really came about, just briefly, is when I started working with children many years ago in Mongolia. This is actually a picture right outside of my village. And so I was working with many children, being their teacher, while their parents were in the countryside herding livestock. And so I would see the impact of long distance parenting, because some of these children would stay with relatives that they were not even really familiar with, and some of them would stay in a dormitory. And over a few years that I lived in Mongolia, I would see that impact in those children. And most recently in Hong Kong, I've been working a lot with the migrant domestic worker community, both the Indonesian and the Filipino community in particular. And over that period of time, I've been working a lot with the parents. And from this side, also, sort of seeing the impact and the strain, the emotional strain and the impact that that can have on them personally and also professionally. And so I'm really excited to share some thoughts and insights with you tonight and to help you be able to bridge that distance. And so our program for tonight, we're going to talk a little bit about pre-departure planning. Then I want to talk about parenting while abroad, also reconnecting during time off, and then we're going to be having some final thoughts. So with that, I'll turn it over to Camille.
Thank you, Christina. It's always super, super interesting to have an overview before we dive more into the topic. We have with us some of our team leaders joining. So team leaders at Uplifters are domestic workers themselves who are actually supporting new students through their learning journey. So we have Mirasol, Ellen Mae saying hi from Hong Kong. And we have Chinita, Sia Firitra Ramani. So as you said, Christina, the domestic workers community in Hong Kong, but it's also the case in Singapore where we have half of our students there, mostly coming from the Philippines and Indonesia. So yeah, you wanted to say something?
Well, I just wanted to say, and I would like to extend, of course, my welcome to everybody who is beyond Hong Kong's borders, to everyone who's joining in globally. And I think that one of the interesting things that you'll find with the presentation this evening is the fact that, a lot of my experience, so whether it was in Mongolia or whether it was here in Hong Kong, and even part of my own personal journey of being overseas for 20 years and having to, maintain that balance and of communication and patience and so forth, maintaining a relationship with children and with friends and family for years at a time is no easy task. And so these learnings, though, as we'll see this evening, have a few things in common for sure.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. So I think we can directly move on. And I would love to start with asking you whether there are things that you would recommend the community to actually think about when it comes to their role as a parent. Like, as a parent living far away from their child or children, are there some questions that we should ask ourselves?
Mm-hmm. Certainly, I feel as a coach, questions are constantly popping into my head no matter wherever I go and whomever I'm working with. I think that no matter where you are on your parenting journey, think these questions that we have here on the screen can help you zoom out from the experience and sort of help you see things in a little bit of a broader perspective. So let me walk you through that a little bit. So in general, thinking about what is your parenting vision? What are your hopes? What are your dreams for your children? And by the way, There's no answer in this moment for that, right? This is something that you don't have to answer it right now. These are just really things that, are very deep, are meant to be deeply pondered, to be really deeply thought about. So, just take them, just sort of slowly, and just reflect upon them tonight, in the next few days, and later on. I want you to also think about, well, what exactly are the expectations that I have for my children and their guardians? Sometimes, as I saw in my experience in Mongolia, the children were often in the care of people who had no idea what they were doing. They didn't sign up to take care of children. I'm talking about elderly people. So in that sense, it's very important to have a clear idea of who you'd like to have as a guardian, and also thinking about, well, what are my expectations of my children? Am I thinking about them going to university? Am I thinking about them going overseas? It flows into that parenting vision. And moving on to the values, thinking about, well, what values are important for my child to have? What do I want them to have in their life? What kind of person do I want them to be like? Do I want them to be patient and kind? Do I want them to appreciate my sacrifice? For some people, or for some children, it's very difficult for them to understand what it's like to be, for yourself as a domestic worker overseas. Your lives are very different, right? So that value of appreciation might be something of importance to you. Moving on to number 4, thinking about the childhood experience as a whole, reflecting on your own childhood. What was that like for you to grow up? Some people I've met had a wonderful childhood filled with joyful experiences and positivity. Others, not so much. So in that sense, it's important to think about, what from your own childhood would you like to bring into your child's childhood? And what would you like to make sure doesn't go in it? I'd like to focus on number 5, thinking about what's happening right now. And in coaching, it's a technique where we explore the reality, what's really going on. So, for example, how are you communicating with your child? Are there any kinds of challenges that are happening? How are they going on in school? How are they being disciplined? Thinking about what is working and what is not is this parenthood continuous work in progress. Because children grow up, people evolve. And so it's important to keep up in that way. And I'd like to also point out the difference between, when it says here, what style do you use to connect with your child? Reactive versus responsive. There's a bit of a difference there in terms of communication. Reactive is very quick. So for example, if something happens, you drop everything, you immediately stress out, even if it's not a big emergency, so to speak. What's happening? What's going on? I'm so worried, and so forth. Oh, I wish I could be with you. Or responsive, talking to the people who are the guardians, communicating with the children in a calm, cool, and collected manner. They're different. Notice your style. What is your style? Question is, has your style and way helped you? And has it helped the relationship? I'd like to talk about if your strategies then are successful. And then if not, what would you change? There are a lot of parents that are out there and they're doing a lot of great things. Keep that going. If there are things that are coming up, think about how you can pivot and change and do something else, and what can work for you. Next, I'd like to highlight what obstacles need to be addressed to make sure that your long-distance parenting is in fact successful. In times of COVID, things have in fact made things very challenging. especially in regards to meeting up in person. So many domestic workers that I've met with in Hong Kong, usually from time to time, have a visit from friends and family from overseas. That has not really happened in a long time, and that has really brought about a lot of anxiety and insecurity in the parenthood. Thinking about finally, which action steps are important for you to take after reflecting. So what do I mean by that? After you've gone about looking at questions 1 through 7, this is really where you're grounded and you've reflected on all different kinds of areas of parenthood. But also importantly to think about, so with all this in mind, what do I want to do now? Who do I need to speak with? What actions do I need to take? And what decisions do I need to make? Okay, so this is a lot of deep reflection, but it covers a lot of territory. Have a think about it. I'll turn it over to Camille.
Thank you, Christina. I think it's very important what you said about there is no right or wrong answers. And I mean, being a long distance parent, it's for sure a unique journey, and it's all about finding our own way of doing that. And another thing that I've heard, and that seems very important to me as well, is that it's constantly moving. Our own values are something that is changing over time, right? So maybe the expectations that we had for our children when they were 5 years old completely changed now that they are 15 years old. So I think it's also very important to be kind to ourselves, and being ready to adapt, and really, trying to at some point in time reflect on what parent do we want to be, and not putting any additional pressure on us than the pressure that migrant domestic workers already face. And as you said, the COVID-19 crisis has worsened the situation, and created a lot of anxiety. So I think, to kind of wrap up this introduction, I think it's very important to just make sure that you find ways to stay connected with your children that actually work for you. And this is what matters the most. I had a quick look at the comments, and we don't have questions for now. So I just wanted to say to you who are watching us, feel free to ask questions, or if you feel like it, share your own experiences about who you want to be as a parent, if you've already had a chance to think about that, or share your successes or challenges as a long distance parent. And I think the next question that I'd like to ask you, Christina, is would you say it is important to plan that long distance parent-child relationship in advance when we have the possibility of doing it? And what if you're already working abroad and you didn't plan before your departure? What are the questions maybe that you should ask yourselves?
Okay. Sure. So I'll get into some pre-departure planning here. So I have quite a few tips here that can serve in support at this stage. And it might be a bit difficult, or people might think that, oh, I'm already overseas. How can I do this? Don't worry. These you can adapt accordingly to your situation and integrate them into your parenting style once you're already overseas. I will say, though, that ideally, if you have other family members that are planning on going overseas and do have children, I would highly recommend sharing these tips, okay? So from this initial perspective, we have to remember this first and foremost from a pre-departure perspective, that family circumstances and goals and parenting styles form and amidst migration are in fact unique. I think that that's an important thing to think about. Everybody has different goals. It might be very easy to compare one family or parenting style or migration goal with others. But this is really in that pre-departure stage, that turning point to really think about, what do you want? What is the purpose? What is the purpose of that migration? And it's important at this pre-departure stage to see, how will your role be in the eyes of the family? So what do I mean? There are some migrant domestic workers that become quite disconnected with their own families. Their families are in the Philippines. They themselves are here in Hong Kong. They don't communicate very much. And their children back at home think that they are being ignored, think that they're being neglected. And that's not the case. And I will say this, one thing that has popped up is that sometimes I've seen in Hong Kong when migrant domestic workers are very close with the families and the children, and then they introduce them to the others. Say, for example, if a migrant domestic worker is on the phone or shows pictures with the family in the Philippines of that person that they're taking care of that child, sometimes jealousy can happen. So it is important, to really share and say, look, if you will be having, taking care of children, articulating that to your children and saying, look, you are my children. This is the family that I'm helping, and there are children there. But first and foremost, you are my kids. Because I've heard a lot of stories of jealousy happening between that. So it's just, and, in times of COVID, not being able to travel and really reconnect, this is something that has come up quite a bit. I'd like to emphasize clarity of the level of engagement that you intend to have with your children. Now, you'd talk differently with a teenager and explain this differently than you would with a 4-year-old, but it is important to give reassurance. So since we are no longer, or we're not able to travel so easily, it is important, texts, calls, voice messages, however you decide, really make sure that there is a plan in place in terms of connecting with your children. And even if it's just for a few minutes, they need to hear your voice. They need to hear that you are there. You need to identify what has been beneficial for the child's growth and development so far. So say, for example, how has your child been raised up until this point? Have they been a good student? Do they have strong study skills? Do they get along with extended family members who potentially might be their guardian? Before you leave to go to another country, it's important to understand your child's habits and to understand what are their tendencies, what are their trends. Now, you can't foresee everything, but at least being on the same page and really understanding these points will help you to understand trends and also to discuss with the guardian so that way the guardian is also informed before you leave. It's important, as we were saying before, to consider the values and aspects of culture and traditions that you want to have as part of your child's upbringing. Sometimes aspects of language and religion come up. It's important that you, the parent, decide how you'd like this to take place in your child's life. It's important to explore and select suitable guardians that will serve as positive and supportive influences. Sometimes people will just choose who's ever close by, someone who quickly volunteers and says, I'll do it. But it's important for you to understand, will this be the right role model for my child? Who can my child look up to when I'm not there? And this is not about replacing you as a parent. This is about making sure your child has that guide in their life, who's there for them in that moment when they need it. Also, presenting strategies for effective growth for your child, physically, cognitively, socially, and emotionally. And this goes hand in hand with when you explore and select a guardian. Some people think that having a child is a piece of cake, and then they have to take care of the child when they're sick, when they're hungry, when they start smoking, and when they also potentially have other delinquent behavior. That can become very frustrating. So again, I'd like to emphasize to make sure that your child is strong mentally, academically, and socially, holistically. It's very important to understand what you want so that you choose the right guardian while you're away. And also, I'd like to highlight ensuring age-appropriate and situation-appropriate discipline. The way that the child is minded when they're 3 years old is very different than a teen, certainly. And so it's important to understand what are their needs and what kinds of action plans will be important to have so that your child learns from discipline, so that your child is not punished, to protect your child as well. In many cases, for people who are even parents, not just children or people who are guardians, they might not know what you have in mind in terms of making sure that your child understands the difference between right and wrong. So these are very important conversations to have. So with that, I'll hand it back to Camille.
Thank you, Christina. I think like my two main takeaways would be that thinking about your future relationship with your children when you will be abroad is not only discussing it with the children themselves, but also taking into consideration other people, especially what we call the guardians, so those who will be looking after your children. So communication is key, as you just very well explained. And I think what we can see as well is that planning is very important. And sometimes in our Dare to Dream course, we joke saying that the process of planning is even more important than the plan itself, because what it helps with is to be able to adapt the plan when the situation requires it to be adapted. So even when you're doing your planning on when you're actually adjusting, just keeping in mind again, and it goes back to what I was saying at the very beginning, things will change because life happens. And having a plan is also a way to reassure yourself, reassure the people that you put your trust in to look after your children, and of course, reassure your children. So really, planning is one thing, planning with others is another thing. And this is what ideally should be done, or at least thought about. What I suggest now, Christina, is that we go to the comments for a little while. We don't have so many for now. There is one that I would like to read out loud, so you can give a little bit of an answer, or like just comment. So we have and first, before I go to the comment, just so you know that we have a lot of comments saying that the topic is of high interest to them. So it seems like it's very appreciated that we're actually discussing this important issue. And Anne-Marie, who is one of our team leaders, she says, I love the topic and things that are discussed. I am a single parent of a teenager. And my question is, how will I handle a disrespectful behavior of a teenager?
Disrespectful behavior in terms of talking back?
Maybe
because disrespectful behavior could be it could be code for a few different things, right? I think that, whatever the behavior is, and this is the thing, I would have a bit of a conversation with the guardian, first of all, to understand if they have noticed anything. Okay? And what have they noticed? Because the thing is, it's important not to come off in an accusatory manner. So the suggestion would be, talk with the guardian a little bit, talk about, is this a one-off kind of thing? When did it happen? How often is it happening? Was it just one curse word, for example? Or is it like a continuous behavior that's like spiraling out of control? So I think first, gaining a little bit more information from the guardian side is key. And that's an important thing, while to have this discipline plan in place. Because of course, it depends on the individual, it depends on the actions that are being done. But once you can get a sense of, what is happening, then you can, bring that evidence into the conversation with that child and say, look, how is everything going? How are you feeling? Have you been stressed out recently? And I'm just, sharing this just off the cuff, but, like, how have you been feeling? Have you been, what's been going on with school? What's been going on in your life? Have you been stressed? What's been going on at home? And you can say, sometimes this behavior perhaps has been coming up, and I understand it might be a stressful time. However, it's something that, I don't want you to be doing. When you do that, it's demonstrating to your guardian disrespect. And, we want to, and you can say, like, I'm working far away from home. I understand that I'm not there. But at the same time, this is the reference point that I have chosen to be with you, to help be with you, to keep you safe, to provide for you, and so on. So I want to make sure that that relationship stays calm and amicable and respectful.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's important to hear the other side of the story. Active listening is super important in this case, because for teenagers, they can get very defensive very quickly. And you don't want a wall to suddenly be put up. So I think that it can be very helpful. And of course, you're the expert in your own situation. But from an outsider's perspective, it's important to hear it from a few different angles before really, moving forward with, an action plan. And you can say, like, if it's something that is, very intolerable, you can say, like, this is something that is very hurtful for me. It's very hurtful for me, and it's important that, that you demonstrate yourself in a mature way. These are the rules. Our family has rules.
Mm-hmm.
And another thing that you can do sometimes, if that individual, say, for example, if an aunt is the guardian and this individual is talking back to the aunt, who else from that aunt side can be supportive? Is it just her, or can other people serve as intermediaries? Okay. Because sometimes it takes a little bit more than just talking it out.
Yeah.
So this is why when you plan and try to think about, well, who are these guardians? Okay, there's the immediate guardian, but then there are other layers of it as well, to have as allies and support.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't need to have 100, you don't need to have 10, but to have a guardian or 2 guardians, depending on the situation, and maybe 2 or 3 allies maximum, because also you have to remember, otherwise it's too confusing. And then the child, no matter what age they're at, doesn't know who to listen to.
Yeah.
So you do have to be mindful about that as well.
Yeah.
As an example, when I've worked with migrant domestic workers before, one of the things in the interview prep that I ask them, I say, so, you need to ask, who do you need to report to? Who is like the number one person you need to connect with? Because if it's with a big family, there's the grandma who you have to report to, and then the grandpa, and then the sister, or the bigger auntie, and then the father, and so forth. So it's like too many voices, and then the child gets confused. So just be mindful about who's the guardian, and then if you can have a few allies on deck as well in order to support you.
Yeah.
And I will say that they have to have like the same mindset. So this vetting process, this explore and select, that doesn't happen overnight. This is like with this pre-departure planning, really getting into the mindset of planning, like this is something that you are not just going to make a split decision on.
Yeah, thank you, Christina. Thank you for your advice. Yeah, I think it's very important to obviously be super clear on what our expectations are, and like having a little bit of firmness, but also to balance that with what I've heard from what you said is really empathy, and empathy for the disrespectful teenager themselves, maybe trying
Yep.
to understand where they're coming from, but also empathy toward yourself and daring to express how it makes you feel. Yeah, we often talk about nonviolent communication in our Dare to Dream course, and I think it's really about, as you said at the very beginning, not being accusatory in any ways, and only doing that will already help, hopefully, the discussion to go well. There are a few comments saying how important it is to plan, and people saying that they wish they would have known that before when they first arrived. Very often the first year is really tough on that in this area. We also have Ellen Mae is saying, and I will read out loud her comment as well, so you can hear it, Christina.
Sure.
It's a very interesting topic. Thank you so much. I learned a lot of new things on how to communicate well with my kids, especially when we have some misunderstanding. Good and active listening is really important. So she's backing up what you just said. And at the very, very beginning, like even earlier this afternoon, we started to have a few comments on our Facebook page. And I'll just read out loud two of them because it comes to another topic, which is how to cope with the emotionally difficult feeling of being far away from your children. So, and I will keep the comments anonymous because it was not during the live. So someone is saying, for me, it's hard sometimes that when our children is crying, seeing them like that makes me heartbroken, especially if they said to you to come back home, but you still can't. So it's what you said about COVID. And another one going a little bit around the same lines. When my daughter is sick, I wish I am there to take care of her and give her hug and cuddle she wants. So it's more about like, being separated from the children and not having the physical connection that you need as a parent.
And if I can just dive in a little bit and touch back, to that first square where it says remember, this is where, I really want each and every one of you to think about, what is your goal? It is hard to be far away from your family. I have been away from my family. The last time I saw my family was over about 2.5 years ago, and also from my husband's family as well. And, we have a niece and nephew in Europe that we miss. And, kids grow up, life goes on. The next time we see them, they're going to be grown that much for sure. My family has gotten older, and I miss them dearly. It has been my choice. It has been my choice to go overseas. But I would take this opportunity to ask you this, when you have these moments of stress and anxiety in relation to parenting, I want to ask you to really reflect upon your goal. Is it worth it? And to what extent is it worth it to you and to your family? And there's no right or wrong answer. But that's why I'm such an advocate to make sure that, your time spent overseas is maximized in the best possible way, because it is, in fact, a sacrifice for you.
Yes. Yeah, I think it's always worth reminding it, but I'm sure domestic workers know that they've learned that the hard way. But yeah, I do agree with you. Things are always easier when you have a why, right? So being very clear with the goal and even if it's a very long term objective, having that end goal will help, especially during difficult times, for sure. So if you don't mind, I'd like to keep going and
Sure.
go a little bit after the departure. How to define your role as a parent while you're working abroad. So are there specific things parents should be especially mindful of?
Sure. Okay, let me dive into that. So I'd like to share that point here. So while you are overseas and parenting while abroad, you want to take a shared parenting approach with an appropriate guardian. So what is that? That means that you are parenting in tandem. So it's not, now I'm away from my children and now it's all on the guardians, or the other parent that is there. This is a shared approach. And you always need to make sure that you are identifying and adapting to the needs of the child. And by adapting, that means, if they need new clothing, if they need a tutor, if they need special needs screening, if they need, a computer for school, whatever their needs are, if they need to see a doctor, all of these things are important to keep in mind. Children, as people, we continue to evolve. We have birthdays, right? So every year, every step of the way, we evolve as people. And so it's important to understand that in this process of parenting, the needs of our children will certainly change. And we need to make decisions collaboratively. Sometimes it can be different if there are single parents involved and you're waiting around for phone calls and feedback about how to do something for the sake of your child. I would encourage you to keep all moods amicable and proactive and productive with the best interests of your child in mind. It's important to coordinate, very importantly, with your employer. Let's talk about that for a moment. Sometimes we talk with our children, on the job and so forth, and that could, especially if we are living with the employer, it can agitate them, right? And so that's why being very upfront in our communication with our employer and say, when would be a good time to, communicate if it's during the work time, finding a balance. Every employer is different. For example, if you want to communicate with your child before they go to school, okay, maybe that might not jive with the schedule of your employer, but you don't know. The worst that they could say is no if it's during work hours. During your personal time, that is your personal time, right? So it's really about understanding, okay, what are the needs of your employer? How does that work with your communication? You need to plan. Some people are very, very hesitant to even talk about these things with their employer. This is your family. This is your sacrifice that you have brought in to that role with that employer. You have every right to talk about it. So it's important to, it's something that maybe some people, are uneasy to talk about or approach. Please don't feel that way. This is your family we're talking about. These are your kids we're talking about. They deserve your communication and to have a clear channel with them. So it's important. I would ask you very kindly to have that confidence to be able to raise that with your employer so that your personal needs and your parenting needs can be met in that way. Of course, to check in regularly to make sure that your parenting plan is on track. So this is not just like the hi or hello, how's it going, and so forth. Really speak with the guardians. Speak with them, 2 or 3 times a month. Everybody's busy to have these, these parenting conversations. But it is important to check in and to make sure that everything is okay. You want to make sure that when you're talking with your kids, that you're keeping your talking points, age appropriate. Okay, so for example, your kids are growing up. So I think a lot of domestic workers in Hong Kong work with children as well. So they know the age more or less when your children don't want to talk about Peppa Pig anymore or Frozen. It's understandable, right? People change. Different trends change. This is where a check-in with the guardian can also serve as a way to understand what are their interests at the moment. Certainly, you can ask your children, so what are you interested in these days? Maybe your children might find that question a little bit boring. That's why it's so important to have a few allies on the ground and the guardians share with you a little bit. What are your children's latest trends? So that way you have some talking points. I would encourage the children to explore, opportunities. Like say, for example, maybe your child would like to try playing a musical instrument back home. There's some parents that are not as supportive as you might think. They might say, oh, it's too expensive, or that's a waste of time. You should just study. Maybe it's a drama group. Maybe it's a dance group. Whatever the interaction or the extracurricular activity may be. Maybe it's just a hobby at home, whatever it is. Encourage your children to pursue a hobby. Let them see that you're interested in things aside from grades. It's important. There's some children that get the feeling that the only reason why the parents are in touch with them is to check how they're doing in school. And for them, that's kind of being a nag. So it's important to be encouraging and to think about, with the help of the guardian, maybe seeking out some age-appropriate opportunities for them to develop their own personal interests. Also, It's important to establish the structure of self-care habits. So for example, how is your child making their own bed? Are they tidying up? Are they being respectful? Are they taking showers when they need to? Are they getting haircuts? Are they grooming themselves accordingly? And so forth. These are also part of growing up as well. Sometimes I've heard of families where the kids come and greet the parent either on a phone call or in the, when pre-COVID at home, and the kid's hair is just wild. The clothes are super dirty and the house is a wreck. And the parent is like, well, how did that happen? A lot of it was because they hadn't checked in accordingly with even these personal habits. And finally, I'd just like to point out to ensure that the child is not involved in conflicts and try to keep the conversations positive. And although, it might be difficult at all times to sugarcoat conversations, think that it's important to just be mindful of keeping a positive tone. And if there are any kinds of issues, especially in relation to discipline or money or employment, that those are kept for the adults who need to be involved in that conversation. The thing that you don't want to involve your child in or make them feel is guilt. Okay, so with that, I'll turn it back to Camille.
Thank you, Christina. Very, very interesting and very, very good insights. Once again, I think it's really about creating the conditions so this positive discussion can actually not only happen a few times, but becoming a habit. And the second thing is really about allies, guardians, partners. So there is also, I think, a bit of humility to have here, and being a long distance parent is really about teaming with other teammates. So all together we have these your children growing healthy kids and healthy adults, and it is a lot to have on one's shoulder to be alone in that journey. So really make sure that you're surrounded with people who share the same objective as you when it comes to parenting and to these children. Just before I ask you the next question, just wanted to say that Anne-Marie, to who you just answered to, thank you a lot. She says, thanks so much, Christina, for that amazing advice. With that advice, with that advice, clear my space of shutting off my son. So I think it was like super useful to her.
You're welcome.
I think the next question, thanks again for that. The next question is, the reality of the situation of domestic workers here, but also in other countries, is that they have very limited time off. So how to make the most of this very precious time? I mean, you touched upon that a little bit, talking about personal time, and I really like what you said about, at the end of the day, it's about your children that we're talking. So it's also, very important to develop the self-confidence so you can talk with your employers. So how to do so? We're using this precious time to connect with family and spend quality time with them, given the circumstances of very limited time off.
Well, one of the things that I would bring it back to is in the interview. Sometimes I feel that when people go into interviews, they're just so desperate. And the thing is, you are being part of a new family, a new employer, and it is, it's a very consuming job. And so the thing is, you have already left your home country. You're working within a foreign language, whether it's English or Cantonese, or, it's something that is very different. You've sacrificed a lot. One of the things that I was just talking about in a workshop that I was running yesterday on interview preparation is really talking about the schedule. What is the timetable in the schedule in terms of like when, what are my working hours, or what did you have in mind in terms of my working hours? And you can bring it up. You can say, I communicate, or I have a call with my family every day at 7 a.m. So I would like to know like how that could fit into the schedule. I think that there's a lot of fear in terms of like, oh, I must adapt everything in my life to my employer. You don't need to do that. There's no need to bow down to the employer. In a professional relationship, it's a two-way street. And I always, in my workshops, try to bring about some, confidence in and having, the domestic workers be able to articulate what their needs are, what they want. Because in an interview, and going hand in hand with communication and like scheduling, it shouldn't just be like a yes, yes, okay, 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 I accept everything that you give me, like a big wave. It's a two-way street, and expressing your situation, right? You can say, I'm relatively flexible. And once you establish your working hours, so say you work, from 8 a.m. and very often in Hong Kong, it's a 12-hour, if not 14-hour shift. So then you can say, okay, so when it's my personal time, especially if you're a live-in domestic worker, you can say, I will be using my phone because I'm contacting my kids and so forth. I think that communication, in short, is the answer. No surprises. It's important that you are who you are. So be proud of it. And if that is, if that works well with that family, then it's the right family for you. But early on in the interview and, having these conversations, if it's, within working hours, try to understand what your employer's immediate needs are and then work around that. Ask, of course, your family in the Philippines or elsewhere. Ask, well, how flexible can they be as well? And also things change, so if it's a school year, maybe in the summertime, the phone call schedule can change. And if phone calls aren't possible, how about messages? It's important to be able to think about not just one way of doing things. COVID has taught us that we need to think differently and come up with different kinds of options. But please do have the confidence to bring this up to your employer. Your children are part of your life, and it's important that communication, they can see your working style and your values just by expressing that point.
Thank you, Christina. I'm a little bit mindful of the time, but we still have a little bit of time ahead of us.
Sure.
Before we kind of wrap up, and before you give the concluding words, or like the one piece of advice that you want to share with the community, are there other things that you'd like to share when it comes to reconnection with the family? So we've talked a lot about the importance of planning those calls and making sure that, again, like the planning. Are there maybe one or two things that you'd like to touch on before we wrap up?
Absolutely. I understand the time and no problem. Let me just touch upon a few points here.
Sure.
So, in this time where many of us are unable to travel, it's important to understand and be proactive. What way do you think your children would like to connect? And then trying a few different methods. Is it Skype? Is it Facebook? Is it Zoom? Is it video calls, or is it just voice messages? Understanding, your own expectations of the kind of communication that you want. Little kids, they don't have a lot of time or attention. So knowing that just brief little bits and pieces of communication throughout the week can be great, whereas longer conversations can be more for children who are a bit older, okay? When we're talking about family reconnection, I want you to think about the achievements and joys, also sharing challenges and frustrations. Not everything that you talk about has to be the perfect picture. It's important that your family understands that sacrifice. Certainly for younger children, you need to be a bit mindful about how you share that. However, once a child is about 8 years old, it's important for them to understand, your role and what you're doing overseas, because you are strongly making a difference in the lives of another family. Also, checking in and making sure that everyone is okay, making sure that there's regular contact with guardians and allies, in addition to children. In relation to staying in touch, I want you to focus on the feelings of that quality time that you've had together. So after you've had, say, maybe a big catch up online or however you do, focus on that feeling and that momentum. Connect yourself with that family. Connect yourself with your roots and think about the journey that you have that has brought you from that point to where you are right now. Think about how you're calling, sending letters and visits. Think about a schedule. A schedule is very, very helpful. Certainly, some things come up and people get busy, but making first and foremost sure that you have a bit of a routine can really help keep the communication on track. And very importantly, alive. That is what makes everything continuing in a positive and upbeat way and an uplifted way.
Thank you, Christina. Yeah, I think this is something that we really encourage our community to do when possible, is sharing the challenges, because it's not necessarily an easy thing for those who stayed in your home country to really have an idea of what your working and living conditions look like. And if you don't tell them, then you might also end up going into this vicious cycle where you want to be meeting their expectations of you, while your conditions maybe do not allow you to do that. And so maybe the best way to break that vicious cycle is not to be ashamed of anything and just sharing with them that the reality of what you're living might be a little bit different from what you dreamed of, or what you even, without necessarily dreaming, but imagine before you made the decision to migrate.
Absolutely.
There are two comments that I'll just show for the audience and read out loud for you, Christina, before we wrap up. So we have someone saying, sometimes it's difficult to be a parent while walking away from our children, but we need to endure the pain for a while. I believe that after I will reach my goal to secure my son's future and a little investment to survive every day, soon I will be home. Thank you so much for all the tips. It really widened my knowledge on how to deal with my son's development and changes in his life while I'm still working abroad. Thank you again. So that's a very long and super nice thank you message.
Wonderful. Thank you.
And then this one, it's a good topic nowadays, especially now it's the pandemic, and almost all kids are suffering a lot, or suffered during the lockdown in the Philippines. For example, kids are not allowed to go out below 12 years old. My kids stayed always at home in the Philippines doing their online class. I am so worried regarding the stress that they are suffering and about communication barriers toward their studies, emotionally and mentally. How can I help my kids as a migrant mother to cope with the effect of this new normal in their studies as well as their daily life?
Wow. Well, I think with everything, with coping and stress, it's important to listen, and it's important to understand. And with children are people. They express their stress in different ways, just like adults. When adults get stressed, sometimes they start smoking or drinking. Sometimes when adults get stressed, or others, they bite their nails, right? So there are different ways that, this stress kind of manifests itself. It's important to understand, where is this coming from and what are the key fears? Where are these things coming from? And this, I think, just to keep it a bit short, it's important that goes back to the guardianship, to really understand what is their behavior like, when did this change happen? Because COVID has been happening for quite some time now. So then the thing is, has it been something recent? Has it been something after there was a particular interaction? Was it after, a poor exam result? These kinds of environmental changes, or, situational changes can impact people and stress, in very different ways. But the important thing is to think about, okay, so what can you do about it? And sometimes it brings you back to basics: eating well, sleeping, making sure that there's time for physical activity in a safe way. Okay. Making sure that that individual feels supported, making feel that this child doesn't feel that they're alone, making sure, and in that case, if they're extremely stressed out and it's making you stressed out, think about how that might be impacting your job as well. So then let that serve as inspiration and motivation for you to reconnect and understand the situation as deeply as you can. And that's where that, group of support can really help you clarify to understand what exactly is going on. And then from there, talking to your child and listening to them and not saying, oh, auntie said this and uncle said that, or whatever it is. Don't put them on the spot like that. Just say, I want to hear from you. How are you doing? Tell me. And make sure that your communication is not over talking.
Yeah.
Listen. These are just some few things that I can say for just to keep it brief tonight.
Yeah. No, thank you. I think again we comes back to the basic. Like it's really about connecting and listening and trying to kind of figure out what exactly we're talking about, because sometimes the big picture itself can feel a little bit overwhelming when we don't know exactly what's going on. And obviously knowing that, we all know that a lockdown is super hard to live and to go through. But yeah, I think going when possible a bit into more details will help also you to focus on what you can control. And that was the whole thing with the pandemic. Like there are things that that are completely out of our control, and it's not helping to just focus on those, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. So, I agree with you. And keeping that positive tone of, well, what do we have and what can we control?
Yes.
Really, that's where that's really the mindset that you need to start from.
Yes. Thank you, Christina. I think we're slowly coming to the end. Maybe if you have a last piece of advice or like some key takeaways, final thoughts that you want to share. So now is the time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Let me just go through those.
Yes.
So everyone, I'd like to encourage you to reflect on your time away from your family. I know it's something that we say, but think about it after everything that we've shared this evening. Think about that time, how long you've been away, and has it been worth it in relation to your goals? Assess your migration future. Where are you at now, and where are you on your migration journey? Consider your physical absence to motivate you to make your emotional presence count. And finally, take advantage of opportunities to connect. You cannot get those moments back. It was Bill Gates who very famously said, I have all of the money that I have, but one thing that, I won't get back ever is time. We have limited amount of time. And so it's important for us to make the most of every moment. And if we cannot physically be there, we need to emotionally be there and communicate with our family and our children. So with that, I'd like to thank you all very much for having me here. Thank you very much, Camille and the team at Uplifters. This is just bringing the conversation to an end over here. So yeah, I hope that it's very helpful.
Thank you, Christina. I'm sure it was. Like we really had comments going that sense. I think it was a very important topic, and I'm very glad that we had you as a guest to go through that, because it's also a tough one. And we usually go through a little bit of a more uplifting ending note with sharing what we're grateful for. And we'll do that in a second. I just think that this topic being a tough one, it would be completely normal that some of you may have felt a little bit emotionally overwhelmed during the session,
Mhm.
and that is a normal thing. So one thing that I'd like to share is that remember what we often say: it is completely okay not to be okay. Remember also that Uplifters is an online community that you can go to and benefit from the support of your peers. If things get harder, if emotions get harder to manage, we also have on our website a directory with all the mental health professional help that you can get if you feel that you need that. So I'll just very quickly screen where you can find that. Sorry, there was this one.
Mhm.
So the community knows. Oops, sorry, this is this one. And then, as I was just saying, let's end this very, very interesting and very helpful episode on a more uplifting note. So, something that we do as an evening ritual in our Dare to Dream course is to share what we're grateful for in the past day or the past week. And it's been proven now that gratefulness is really helping keeping a positive mindset, and he's like angel very good for mental health, right? So are there one, two, or three things that you'd like to share with us, Christina, that you're happy about?
Well, first and foremost, I'm very happy that I was able to come and share my thoughts and experience with Uplifters today. So that makes me happy. It's wonderful to be able to share that with the community. I'm also happy that my day started very early this morning, around 6:30, and I feel that I've done everything that I needed to do, and I've done it to the best of my abilities. And the third thing that I'm really happy about and grateful for is that I still have the mindset within all of that busyness to pause myself and take breaks when I needed to. I was listening to what my body needed and what my mind needed, and that's how I'm still here right now. So I feel great. I'm not tired. I feel refreshed. And so that has really brought me to a great end to my day.
Thank you. Thanks a lot for sharing. Like, I actually feel very much the same. I feel very energized, even if it's going to be time to go to bed. It's funny because like two of the things that I wanted to share are very similar. So I also had a very, very early start this morning, but I was super grateful to be on my ferry commuting to my workplace at an early time. So the weather was not too hot and it was sunny, and I really enjoyed the ferry ride. It was very relaxing. And I'm also very grateful to someone in my life who recently introduced meditation and mindfulness to me, and he's helping me to kind of create a routine and to practice on a regular basis. And I can tell that it's already after a few weeks of practice helping a lot. So this is something that I would very much encourage everyone to do, to practice, to have like 10 or even 5 minutes of focus per day when possible. So thank you again. I think we're definitely coming to the end of this episode. It was lovely to have you as our guest. I'm super grateful for you coming, and that was my third and last gratefulness. We have covered a lot of questions. Your insights and advice were like very helpful again. So I also want to thank everybody for joining. Take care. Do not hesitate to keep the conversation rolling using the comments box if you feel you need so. And I do hope that we'll have other opportunities to share more on that very important topic. Bye-bye, everyone. Have a good night and take care.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.